So, picture this. You're standing in this vast, sun-drenched courtyard, ancient Egypt, and the air, it's thick, not just with heat, but with the sound of destruction.
Yeah, hammers and chisels. It's around, what, 1334 BC?
Exactly. And all around you, workers are just swinging away at these massive stone columns at Karnak. I mean, Karnak, the greatest religious center in the world.
But they're not building anything. It's the opposite.
They're erasing, systematically, trying to wipe the name of this one Pharaoh Akhenaten, right? The one pleasing to the Aten.
Trying to get him off every single visible surface in the entire empire. It's the ultimate historical scrubbing, isn't it?
Absolutely. A deliberate, organized attempt to just pretend that a man who ruled, like, the most powerful empire on Earth for 18 years.
Just poof. Never existed.
The sheer scale of it, the determination, it really tells you something. It tells you how, I don't know, terrifyingly radical his whole vision must have felt to the establishment he was challenging.
Oh, absolutely. They weren't just, correcting a little mistake. They believed they were restoring the cosmic order itself. And they felt he just completely fractured violently.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? We're going to unpack this forgotten story, this story of, well, divine revolution, radical monotheism.
And these really unprecedented family situations. I mean, father-daughter marriages use almost like a political tool.
Yeah, stuff that really shook ancient Egypt to its core, and ultimately it led to him being basically wiped from history. So we're diving into the sources to understand the rise, the reign, and, well, the erasure of the pharaoh who tried to invent a new god.
Okay, so where do we start? We start with the prince. Around 1353 BC, a young guy named Amenhotep IV, he comes to the throne.
Right. His father was Amenhotep III, and his reign, 38 years of just extraordinary stability, wealth.
Yeah, total opulence, the peak of the new kingdom, really. Temples glittering with gold, the kingdom stretching across, well, pretty much the known world at that point. Prosperity seemed guaranteed by worshiping the traditional gods, especially the big state god, Amun-Ra.
So the young king inherits this perfect situation. Stability, wealth, power. You'd think, okay, just keep things going, right?
Exactly, perfect scenario for continuity. But the sources tell a different story. This young king, he had immediate and frankly seismic plans right from the get-go.
Okay, let's dig into that situation he inherited a bit more. Because when Amenhotep I takes over, it's not just wealth he gets. It's this entrenched religious industrial complex in Thebes.
Oh yeah, something that seemed, virtually impossible to challenge.
It was way more than just a church, right? It was like the foundational economic engine of Egypt.
Precisely. You absolutely have to grasp the immense power of that old guard.
Yeah.
Specifically the Amun priesthood. Their influence was just woven into every single aspect of Egyptian life. They weren't just like spiritual guides.
No, they were this vast economic powerhouse, a major administrative force, too.
The numbers you find in the sources are just staggering. They really highlight why this whole confrontation was almost, well, inevitable.
Yeah, like the Karnak temple complex. It wasn't just a building, it was this massive institution employing thousands. Priests, scribes, craftsmen, servants.
Their treasury was overflowing, tribute coming in from the entire empire.
And to put some real numbers on that for you listening, the Amun priesthood controlled over 80,000 slaves.
80,000.
And owned 420,000 head of cattle.
Wow.
But maybe the most critical part, they controlled roughly 1/3 of all the cultivatable land in Egypt.
A third, that's huge.
It's about 900 square miles,
Right.
all dedicated to the god Amun.
So effectively, the high priest of Amun was running a parallel state economy.
Totally. He's managing agriculture, manpower, international tribute. His power in some ways rivaled the pharaohs, didn't it? Especially within Thebes.
Absolutely. So you can see, threatening the worship of Amun, that wasn't just a theological issue, it was threatening the entire economic foundation of the state.
Which is exactly why Amenhotep V's first moves were so, well, alarming to them.
And we should probably mention the king himself, physically. Contemporary accounts, they describe Amenhotep V as distinctive.
Yeah, tall, kind of lanky, narrow shoulders, wide hips, almost androgynous looking.
Right, which contrasted really sharply with that traditional, muscular, perfect image of an Egyptian king, the sort of physical embodiment of Mu'at cosmic order. He looked different.
He stood apart visually. And pretty soon, theologically, too.
But the first real tangible hint of change, it was artistic, showed up around year 4 of his reign.
It wasn't like a big decree yet. It was a revolution in how things looked, in aesthetics.
Yeah, for like 3,000 years, Egyptian art had been very rigid, right?
Yeah.
Meant to be eternal, timeless, idealized perfection.
And suddenly, boom, it gives way to this startling intimacy. Real human emotion.
This is where the revolution kind of creeps in subtly. We start seeing these reliefs, showing the royal family him, Amenhotep IV, and his queen, Nefertiti.
Underneath the rays of the Asen, the sun disk.
Exactly. And it's an immediate theological statement right there on the picture. Each ray ends in a tiny little hand.
Offering the Ankh, the key of life.
But only to the king and queen, directly to them. They're the only ones getting it, which makes them the only conduits, the only intermediaries for the god's life force.
And the way the royals themselves are shown, it's profound. Nefertiti isn't just some divine symbol. She's shown as like a living, breathing woman, a real partner.
Yeah, you see images of her holding the king or sitting on his lap, exchanging affectionate glances, this kind of public display of royal affection, this almost domestic intimacy.
It's totally unprecedented. A massive break from tradition where the pharaoh was always distant, divine, untouchable.
And that intimacy, it extended to their family, too. Their daughter's Meritaten, which means beloved of the Aten, Uncas and Paten. She lives for the Aten and the others.
They're shown playing under the god's gaze.
Right. Even the names. The names of the royal kids were basically walking theological statements, making it super clear that divinity was now focused entirely within this one specific sacred family unit.
You can imagine the alarm bells going off for the Amun priests back in Thebes. This young pharaoh wasn't just, promoting some minor sun god.
No, he was threatening to collapse everything.
Yeah.
The whole complex mythology, the pantheon of gods built up over centuries, the elaborate funerary practices that promised everyone eternal life.
He was essentially suggesting that the foundation of their entire civilization, their religion, was just superstition.
And that inevitably leads to the big confrontation. By his 5th year on the throne, the theological conflict was just out in the open, unavoidable.
And Amenhotep V makes the ultimate statement. He changes his name.
Right. He becomes Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten, or maybe devoted to the Aten.
And Queen Nefertiti gets a new name, too. Neferueten.
Beautiful is the beauty of the Aten. They were literally erasing their old identities, the ones connected to Amun.
But that was just the warm-up act, wasn't it? The really shocking decision came in year 6. Akhenaten doesn't just sideline the old priesthood.
He abandons them completely.
He leaves Thebes, the religious and political capital for, 500 years? Home of his ancestors' tombs?
Everything. He just ups and leaves to build a brand new city. From scratch, dedicated only to his god, the Aten.
Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten.
Just think about the sheer shock of that move, leaving behind all the established government machinery, the temples, the comfort of the ancestral tombs. I mean, it shows either this incredible, maybe frightening confidence in his divine mission.
Or maybe dangerous megalomania.
Or maybe, a bit of both fused together.
Yeah.
He was basically ripping the capital city out by its roots.
But the location he chose, that was actually pretty clever, wasn't it? Strategically brilliant, even.
Definitely. He picked a spot that was virgin territory, totally unoccupied, guaranteeing the city would be free from any, contamination from previous gods or shrines.
And crucially, the geography helped. The site was backed by these imposing limestone cliffs.
And as the sun came up each morning, it looked like it was rising directly from those cliffs, like a daily miracle reinforcing his new theology.
Meritaten was going to be a clean slate, geographically and spiritually.
And the speed. The speed they built this thing is one of the most incredible parts of the whole story. It shows not just, religious passion, but real architectural innovation.
Yeah. How do you build a massive capital city stretching over 5 miles in the middle of an empty desert in just a couple of years?
Innovation.
Yeah.
The architects used these standardized stone blocks. They're called talatat.
Right. They were roughly, 20 by 10 by 15 inches?
Something like that. Small enough for one man to carry, move around, and assemble really quickly.
So this technique, it allowed them to build monumental buildings, but way faster than the old method of using those massive, heavy granite blocks.
It was basically ancient Egypt's version of, prefabricated construction. Very clever.
And within 2 years, the basic city was up. Palaces, government buildings, the huge temples.
Yep, the core was complete. The sheer number of these blocks, hundreds of thousands of them, meant the city went up fast. But ironically, that architectural shortcut, it later made it just as easy to tear down.
Okay, let's talk about the heart of this new city, the great Temple of the Aten, because this was the main statement, architecturally and theologically. It rejected everything Karnak stood for.
Absolutely. Think about traditional Egyptian temples like Karnak. They were designed to be dark, mysterious, super exclusive places.
Right. Only the pharaoh and the highest priests could go into the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, where the hidden god Amun lived in darkness.
Akhenaten's temple was the exact opposite.
It was huge, right? Covered an area about 800 by 300 meters.
And the key thing, totally open to the sky.
That open design, that was a theological point in itself.
A necessity. No hidden chambers, no secret rituals, and crucially, no need for intermediaries. No priest standing between you and the god.
Because the god was the visible sun. Its rays, its life-giving power touched every single corner of the temple.
Worshippers didn't need a priest to translate what the god wanted. They just had to look up, experience the god directly.
Which brings us nicely to the actual theology, Atenism. Because this wasn't just simple sun worship, was it? It was actually quite sophisticated monotheism.
It was a huge philosophical leap, really. Atenism proposed a single, universal creator god, the source of all life, manifested directly through the sun disk you could see.
And this god wasn't just for Egypt. He was the creator of all lands, all people, all creatures, universal.
We know how sophisticated it was, mainly from this incredible piece of poetry that survived. The great hymn to the Aten. It was found inscribed in the tomb of Ai, one of his courtiers.
And the language is just breathtakingly exclusive, isn't it?
It states it so clearly. O sole God, like whom there is no other. You did create the world according to your desire whilst you were alone. It really emphasizes the Aten as the source of everything, making the seasons, putting rain in the sky, nurturing the fetus in the womb.
And this focus, the singular focus on one universal God who creates and runs the natural order, that sparked a lot of debate among scholars, hasn't it? Connecting Atenism to much later religious ideas.
Precisely.
Right.
What's really fascinating are the parallels,
Mhm.
the similarities between the great hymn and, say, Psalm 104 in the Hebrew Bible.
They are striking.
Incredibly so. The themes, the structure, both celebrate this single powerful God managing the cosmos, providing light, controlling the seas, nurturing animals. Scholars have wondered for ages about possible links, influences maybe. Could this radical Egyptian experiment have had some kind of conceptual echo later on in the ancient Near East? It's tantalizing.
And the king and his court, they lived their lives totally structured around this idea of divine clarity, this visible God. The whole daily rhythm in Akhenaten revolved around the sun's journey.
Yeah, worship was constant, a visible performance. The court's day was basically a liturgy.
Started before dawn.
Yep. Morning worship to greet the rising sun.
Fine.
Akhenaten and Nefertiti acting as the chief priests, making offerings. Then big ceremonies when the sun was at its peak, its zenith, in the afternoon, when the Aten's power was strongest.
And then evening worship.
More somber, yeah. As the sun set behind those western cliffs, acknowledging the temporary, win for darkness, but expressing total confidence that the light would return.
Reinforcing that central message constantly. Only through the king and queen could you really know the god.
Exactly. They were the soul link.
Okay, so Akhenaten's done it. He's built his city, established his theology, kicked his enemies out, metaphorically speaking. But then paradise hits a wall. The oldest problem in the book for kings. Succession.
Right. Nefertiti, his great partner, she gives him 6 daughters, but no son. And that creates this huge crisis, not just for the dynasty, but for the whole religious revolution.
It wasn't just about bloodline, was it? It was like a theological time bomb ticking.
Totally. Any heir had to be 100% committed to Atenism, because if they weren't, the old Amun priesthood, super wealthy, super powerful, just waiting in the shadows, they would instantly reverse everything the second Akhenaten died.
So that threat, that really limited who could possibly take over.
Drastically. And this is what forces us into the most, extreme and definitely controversial part of his reign. These forbidden unions.
We should probably acknowledge the context first, right? Sibling marriage, even occasional father-daughter marriage, it wasn't completely unheard of in New Kingdom Egypt.
True, but usually it was more ritualistic, sporadic. Akhenaten's approach, it was systematic. It felt desperate, driven by this almost frantic need to keep this specific, pure, divine bloodline going.
The systematic part is key. Around year 12, Nefertiti just vanishes from the records.
Yet it's a big mystery. Did she die? Fall out of favor? Did she maybe even become this male co-ruler Smenkhkare? Scholars argue about it constantly.
But whatever happened, she was gone as chief queen, and Akhenaten immediately turns to his daughters to secure the future.
The first one is Meritaten, beloved of the Aten, She starts showing up in release in the spots usually reserved for the chief queen.
And by year 13 of his reign, she's officially made great royal wife. She was probably only, what, 16?
Around that age, yeah. And the justification for this, it was shockingly complex. It went beyond just politics into this really radical theology.
Akhenaten wasn't just acting like a king anymore. He was trying to embody the Aten itself.
Exactly. Theologically, the Aten was described in the hymns as being both father and mother of all creation, containing all the creative forces needed for existence within itself.
So, by marrying his own daughter, Akhenaten was trying to make an earthly reflection of that divine self-generation.
That seems to be the idea.
Yeah.
Trying to ensure the royal house contained all creative power within itself, concentrating divinity, guaranteeing the absolute purity of the lineage dedicated to Atenism. It's an extreme theological justification for, well, an extreme act.
But the complexity just spirals, doesn't it? It shows the chaos bubbling under the surface of all this religious purity. Around year 15, Meritaten then marries Smenkhare.
This mysterious figure who pops up briefly is Akhenaten's co-regent. And scholars fight endlessly about who Smenkhare was. A younger brother, a son, even Nefertiti herself in disguise as a male king.
We just don't know for sure. But whoever he was, this arrangement created this totally unprecedented and frankly confusing situation. Meritaten is now the wife of two pharaohs at the same time.
Her father, Akhenaten, and the co-regent, Smenkhare.
That level of family entanglement, it just screams desperation in the royal court, doesn't it?
It really does. And Smenkhare was probably brought in for practical reasons too, likely military leadership.
Ah, right. Because as we'll get to, the Amarna letters show the empire was starting to crumble around the edges.
Exactly. Akhenaten probably needed someone focused on those external military threats while he obsessed over religious perfection back in Akhenaten.
Okay, so this political and theological juggling act then frees Akhenaten up for yet another marriage.
Yeah. He elevates his next eldest daughter, Akhenaten, to be chief queen.
And she was incredibly young, probably no more than 13 or 14 years old.
That seems right. And the reliefs that survive showing this change, they are, well, undeniably disturbing, especially looking back now.
They show a girl, basically prepubescent, dressed in the full regalia of a queen, standing next to her father, who was also her husband.
It's a dramatic illustration of just how desperate they were to keep that theological bloodline going, whatever the human cost, forcing this very young girl to give up being a daughter for this incredibly complex, burdened role of daughter-wife queen.
And that human cost, it wasn't just abstract. It was tragically recorded right there in stone, wasn't it? In the royal tomb at Akhenaten.
Yeah, the tomb intended for Akhenaten contains these scenes showing the death of another daughter, Meritaten. And the sources, the images themselves, are grimly clear.
They show the royal family mourning over a woman who's lying on a birthing bed, attendants all around, a wet nurse holding a newborn baby.
It strongly suggests Meritaten died in childbirth.
And given that this happened right during the peak of these extreme father-daughter marriages,
it raises some really disturbing questions, doesn't it? About the fate of the other young daughters involved in these early unions, especially when you factor in the already high mortality rates back then and just the inherent dangers of pregnancy at such a young age.
it really suggests the price of achieving this divine purity was paid in actual blood.
It seems likely. And what's more, that intimate domestic art style, the beautiful scenes of Nefertiti and the kids that initially celebrated the revolution, it became increasingly tangled, hard to figure out as Akhenaten's reign went on.
The artists had an impossible job, really.
Totally. Traditional Egyptian symbols, their iconography, it just didn't have a way to depict father-daughter marriage or these weird co-regency situations.
So they had to kind of improvise.
Yeah, make up a visual language on the fly, which resulted in images that were, technically brilliant in how they were carved, but deeply complex, maybe even unsettling in what they were trying to say, reflecting the chaos that was starting to consume the court.
And while Akhenaten is totally consumed by all this theological stuff, these domestic complexities in his bubble city, Akhenaten, fixated on internal perfection.
The empire outside, it's collapsing.
And we know this with incredible clarity because of those letters found in the city's foreign office, the famous Amarna letters.
Right, this cache of diplomatic correspondence. And these letters, they paint this stark, very specific picture of external neglect, military decay,
Vassal kings, rulers in places like Syria and Palestine who relied on Egyptian soldiers for protection.
They're sending desperate pleas, increasingly frantic messages asking for military support against invaders, especially the expanding Hittite Empire.
The letters really detail the collapse, king by king. Like Ribadi, the ruler of Byblos, he wrote again and again, begging for archers.
Yeah, there's one famous line. I fall at the feet of the king, my lord, 7 times and 7 times. May the king send archers. If this year there are no archers, then all the lands of the king, my lord, will perish.
He sent letter after letter, saying his city was under siege, basically screaming for the pharaoh to do his job as emperor.
But the sources suggest the response from Akhenaten was, well, pretty much silence. Or maybe just vague, non-committal promises.
He was too busy with his religious perfectionism.
It seems so. The military situation was just neglected. And this inaction, it allowed the Hittites to attack Egypt's key allies, like the Kingdom of Mitanni, which destabilized the whole region and basically signaled to the world that Egypt's mighty military machine was, well, rusting away because the pharaoh was distracted.
And internally, back in Egypt, alienation was growing just as fast as the empire shrinking.
That displaced almond priesthood, they didn't just vanish, they went underground, kept worshiping the old gods in secret, just waiting for their chance to come back.
And archaeological evidence suggests that Atenism itself, this kind of intellectual, distant faith, it basically failed to catch on with ordinary Egyptians outside the court.
And you can see why, right? Atenism offered this remote sort of blessing. The common people, they missed the personal connection, the comfort they got from traditional gods like Isis, the mother goddess, or Ptah, the craftsman god.
They missed the festivals, the local shrines, the promises of help in the afterlife. The Eton was just too distant, too abstract, too intellectual.
Yeah, all of the above. Plus, you had the massive economic disruption from shifting all those temple estates and trade networks. That created real poverty, which just fueled public resentment against this whole new order.
Even the revolutionary art, the style that started it all, it kind of turned against Akhenaten in his later years. It became almost a visual sign of the internal breakdown.
Definitely. The initial move towards realism gave way to increasingly unsettling images. Grotesque, even.
Statues and portraits of Akhenaten from this later period, they show features that just aggressively violate all the ideals of Egyptian kingship.
Like those impossibly elongated skulls, the exaggerated, almost pendulous breasts, the wide hips. The sources suggest these features obliterate any trace of masculine authority.
And that image must have been deeply unsettling to people at the time. It looked like a rejection of Ma'at, that traditional balance, order, and strength you expected from a divine ruler.
The whole experiment was visibly failing. Smenkhare, the co-regent, he disappears. Maybe died, maybe assassinated, we don't know.
The diplomatic situation totally fell apart.
And while the palaces in Akhenaten were still grand on the surface, archaeology finding things like huge trash heaps, neglected buildings shows the residential areas were falling into poverty, decay. People started abandoning the city.
Just quietly drifting away, heading back towards the old centers of power.
Seems like it. The king who declared himself the sole link between heaven and earth found himself more and more isolated, trapped in his city dedicated to this failing idea.
The initial energy of the revolution just sort of calcified into this rigid, unsustainable system.
Yeah. And the stage was set for the inevitable collapse.
Akhenaten dies in his 17th year as pharaoh, around 1336 BC. The circumstances, still mysterious.
No clear evidence of violence or plague or anything like that, but, you can speculate. Maybe the relentless psychological strain of trying to hold this collapsing world together.
Or potential genetic issues, like Marfan syndrome, which would have been made way worse by all the extreme royal inbreeding that was meant to keep the divine blood pure.
Could be. His immediate successors, like that mysterious female ruler Neferneferuaten, maybe Nefertiti in a last role, and Smenkhare, they ruled very briefly. But the child who really seals the fate of the whole Amarna revolution is Tutankhamun.
Born Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten.
Right. He becomes pharaoh when he's only about 8 or 9 years old.
And modern science, DNA analysis, it confirms the really profound and kind of disturbing genetic cost of those Amarna family policies.
Yeah, analysis of his mummy confirmed his parents were full brother and sister, almost certainly Akhenaten and one of his sister wives. It's a catastrophic example of that inbreeding.
So this child, barely old enough to understand what's going on, he becomes the focus for the counter-revolution.
And the restoration. It was immediate, swift, orchestrated by the court advisors, the guys who'd served under the old system.
Within 3 years, Tutankhaten changes his name to Tutankhamun, honoring the very god his father tried to destroy.
The court abandons Akhenaten. The city's now seen as this tainted place. They move back to Memphis, the old administrative capital.
And we actually have the official decree making this reversal public. The restoration stela, found at Karnak, set up by the new regime.
And it absolutely condemns the whole Amarna period, describes it as a time of cosmic disorder. Says the temples of the old gods were left desolate, shrines overgrown with weeds, and that the gods had literally turned their backs upon this land.
So the goal wasn't just revenge. It was this desperate need to reestablish Ma'at, the traditional divine order they felt Akhenaten had broken.
The restoration was total. Temples and their vast lands were given back to the Amun priesthood, instantly re-empowering the old guard.
Traditional, idealized art comes back immediately, rejecting the weird realism and the grotesque stuff from Amarna.
But the final, most systematic destruction, that was launched by General Horemheb. He grabs the throne after Tutankhamun dies young, around age 19.
And this was the real damnatio memoriae, the total planned historical erasure. Horemheb saw Akhenaten and his immediate successors as illegitimate usurpers.
So every single mention of Akhenaten, chiseled out of the stone.
Yeah.
Everywhere. His statues are smashed to pieces, buried.
And Horemheb, the ultimate pragmatist, he wasn't just destroying the memory, he was physically dismantling the city of Akhenaten.
Remember those Talatat blocks? The ones that let them build the city so fast?
Yeah.
Well, they made it just as easy to tear down. Horemheb's workers systematically took them from the ruins.
And reused them.
Yeah, as filler. Inside the foundations of new temples, Horemheb was building for Amun. The most effective way to erase the past was literally to bury it under monuments to the restored gods.
And the final nail in the coffin, the official king lists, the historical records compiled later on.
They just skipped him. Went straight from Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father, directly to Horemheb.
Ensuring Akhenaten suffered the absolute worst fate you could imagine in ancient Egyptian belief, having your name obliterated, which meant you couldn't survive in the afterlife. You died a second, final death in the realm of forgetting.
And you know what? It worked. Completely. The erasure was so successful that for 3,000 years, Akhenaten was basically just a rumor, a weird, confusing gap in the lists of kings.
Until the late 19th century, right, when archaeologists started excavating the ruins we now call Amarna.
Exactly. And slowly, this revolutionary, forgotten pharaoh was dragged back out of oblivion and into the light.
So, okay, what does this all mean for us thinking about it now? We started with that image, workers chipping names off stone. This whole experiment, this brief, kind of brilliant period of radical monotheism, feels like a tragic clash, doesn't it?
Yeah. One man's singular vision of truth, the clear, visible sun god, the Aten, just colliding head-on with 3,000 years of tradition.
And it led to both this profound cultural revolution, but also total historical collapse for him personally.
It really reveals the danger, maybe, of ideology when it gets disconnected from the practical realities of actually governing. And maybe disconnected from that fundamental human need for ritual, community, personal connection to something divine. Akhenaten searched for this pure truth, but in the end, he just found isolation.
And here's where it gets really provocative, I think. Akhenaten's whole theology, it was founded on the idea of divine simplicity. One visible God, no complex interpretation needed, no intermediaries, simple, clear.
Right.
Yet to enforce and protect that single simple vision, he created the most convoluted, disturbing family structures in Egyptian history, demanding extreme inbreeding, familial sacrifice.
It's like a profound contradiction.
It really is. So here's a question maybe for you to think about. Does this suggest that maybe even the most simple revolutions, theological, political, ideological, do they always risk collapsing when they try to use extreme human complexity, like intense control, inbreeding, sacrifice, to enforce that divine or ideological purity?
What boundaries are we, even today, willing to break in the name of achieving some kind of simple, perfect, unified vision? That trade-off. Akhenaten's story really makes you think about that tragic trade-off, doesn't it? Long after this deep dive ends.